Welcome to this week's Wireless LAN News Desk. My name is Tom Carpenter. I'm the CTO at CWNP. And here on January 12, 2018, we have three brief pieces of news to bring to you this week. First of all, it was reported this week that the Wi-Fi Alliance is introducing a new certification for wireless products. This is coming later in this year, and it's going to be called WPA3. Now, this is not necessarily based on some new security amendment to the 802.11 standard, but rather it's a certification pushing the security forward, taking advantage of external security solutions. That is, solutions that if the Wi-Fi Alliance certifies them as being compatible within devices, we can trust that all WPA3 devices can take advantage of them. For example, in the 802.11 standard, it specifies that CCMP 128 must be provided by anything that uses CCMP AES. So therefore, a 128-bit key has to be used for encryption if we're dealing with CCMP AES in wireless devices. And WPA2 does validate that. However, it allows for CCMP 256 processing, that is up to 256-bit keys. Right now, it's a bit complex and more than we want to get into in a newscast, but you do have two different 128-bit keys that are broken apart for specific purposes, but most systems use a 128-bit encryption key today. So WPA3 will take that further to 192-bit encryption. In addition, it's going to provide extra security for those scenarios where you use WPA pre-shared key or WPA3 pre-shared key. The concept will be to implement some improvements that make it so that it's harder to use a weak passphrase. We'll add some extra things algorithmically to the process to make sure that even with a weak passphrase, it's very challenging to crack that network, or at least more challenging. Now, in addition to enhancements to WPA through the release of WPA version 3, they also have promised to enhance WPA2 certification as well. I'm sure this is probably driven, at least in part, by the crack vulnerability that was announced and that we've done a webinar on previously, so I won't go into great details on that, but we'll see enhancements to WPA2 and a new WPA3 coming later this year. There'll be further enhancements as well in relation to WPA3, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about those in more detail in an upcoming webinar with CWNP. Now, the second big thing in the news this week was something that kind of resurfaced, you might say. So Cypress Technologies introduced their CYW89359 802.11 AC combo chipset, really targeted at automobiles so that you can have Wi-Fi in automobiles. But one of the features they're touting is interesting, and it has resurfaced again. This feature is what we call Real-Simultaneous Dual-Band, or RSDB. Now, you probably know we have something in our access points we talk about a lot called dual-band concurrency, meaning that an AP can both run a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5 gigahertz SSID at the exact same time. So both radios are being used at the same time. The concept here is within a chip to provide dual band concurrency. And again, it's called Real-Simultaneous Dual-Band. But Cypress chipset here this week is not the first one to do this. Broadcom, all the way back in, I believe it was 2015, released a chipset, the BCM4359 chipset, that was capable of this as well. The concept that I want to talk about here is what advantage might this bring to client devices if we see more clients using an RSDB chipset so that they actually have the ability to run both the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands at the same time. One area that just stands out to me as obvious from the beginning is roaming, because if I'm currently connected to a 5 gigahertz AP, without actually having to go off channel at all, I could scan the 2.4 gigahertz band to look for other APs. And the same would be true vice versa. So if I'm connected to 2.4 gigahertz, I could scan 5 gigahertz. Not only that, but initial connection can be optimized. Think about it. I can scan 2.4 and 5 gigahertz at the same time. So I can actually be scanning through those channels at the same time to find the best access point. And one thing, at least we could hope as wireless LAN engineers, is that if I'm doing that, I have fewer of these scenarios where my client device is just saying, hey, I started scanning in 2.4 gigahertz, which most of them do, and I didn't even get to 5 gigahertz. I already found an AP, so I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. And it might not be what's best for me if there's a 5 gigahertz AP that can give me better performance. So by scanning both at the same time, maybe, just maybe, I could get onto that 5 gigahertz AP more often than not. So those are certainly advantageous. Now, the use case scenario that was touted when the original Broadcom chipset came out was the ability to be connected to Wi-Fi on 2.4 gigahertz and then connected to your TV on 5 gigahertz. So you could be streaming down to your mobile phone or tablet on a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi connection, and then you could be video streaming up to your TV on 5 gigahertz. In other words, you're actually actively using them at the same time. And there were some studies that showed that that would optimize performance. I'm sure we could come with all kinds of throughput performance optimizations and so forth that would be enhanced, but certainly I see the advantage of being able to look for networks in both bands more quickly, and the potential for roaming opportunities there as well. So will we see more of this RSDB use in client devices? Only time will tell, but the potential is there. We have multiple chipsets out there now that support it, and so we could see more and more use of this in our client devices. Now, the last topic that I want to talk about today is the announcement from Ether Tronics about their active steering technologies. And this was more of a partnership announcement that they made, but they were indicating that newer Dell laptops are going to have the newest Ether Tronics chip in them, which gives you something called active steering with the antennas in the client devices. Now, if you've studied antenna patterns related to laptop devices, you're probably aware of the reality that that pattern is greatly impacted by the way the user positions the screen, because so many laptops have their antennas in the screens. Some do not. Some just have them in the back panel of the base of the laptop, but others have them in the screens. And if they're in the screens, the movement of that screen certainly impacts the receptivity as well as the transmission patterns that the antennas are generating or that the antennas are using for reception. So with active steering, the concept is that we have different ways those antennas can be used to generate different patterns. And based on that reality, if they generate different patterns, they also have different receptivity in those scenarios. So think of it like using a single antenna. And you've got an omni antenna that has a pattern that radiates energy out all around it with some type of vertical pattern as well, and some type of either thick or flat donut kind of shape. But then you also have something like a Yagi antenna or a patch or panel antenna or a parabolic dish antenna, which is more directional, meaning not necessarily the same output all around that antenna. Well, in the same way that they have higher gain and output in a given direction, they have higher receptivity from that direction as well. So that's how directional antennas work, and that's why with a directional antenna, for example, if you're using a spectrum analyzer to try to locate RF interference, by turning it, you can see where the signal's coming from more clearly than you can with an omnidirectional antenna, because it's fairly equal in receptivity all around that antenna. So here, with active steering concepts in your laptop, the promise is a gain of from 2 to 3 dB. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but if you couple that with already they are MIMO antennas, and then you also have 2 to 3 dB of gain, you have enhancement that's worth talking about. So you could be talking about a jump of an MCS in your actual signal capabilities. And what could that mean? Well, it could mean the difference between 86.7 megabits per second and 130 megabits per second. That's an example of one MCS change. And by the way, one that can be accomplished with 3 dB difference in the signal. So therefore, if we think about that, then you can get that device on and off the network 60, 65, maybe 70% faster because of that enhancement. So it certainly is something worth thinking about. This is another one of those client capabilities. So we talked about RSDB, and now we talk about active steering. in clients. And yes, we've had APs that did this active steering for years from one particular vendor. This similar kind of concept is in the client. Not as enhanced as it would be in an AP, just like dual band concurrency is not necessarily as common of a feature we use in clients as we do in APs. But seeing these move into the clients is promising for the future. No need for 802.11 enhancements. This is all in the chipset for hardware antenna steering, if you will. And the same is true with RSDB. No real need for enhancements to the standard. This is all handled in the chipset for which band we connect to, or if we're using both bands at the same time or just one band at once. So these are all interesting things that we see right on the cusp of 802.11ax coming out in the coming year as a ratified amendment. So you put all of this stuff together, and there's some really interesting things coming in the future of Wi-Fi. So what does this news tell us? Wi-Fi isn't slowing down. It's only ever growing at an increasing rate, and your Wi-Fi skills are going to become more and more valuable as we go into the future. Well, thank you for viewing the Wireless LAN News Desk today, and if you haven't already, make sure you click subscribe down below, click the bell to get notifications, and you'll know when we go live every Friday in the coming year. Thank you again for viewing.